Last week in this segment of Search the Scriptures Daily, we were discussing Chapter 8 of Dave Hunt's new book, Judgment Day, Islam, Israel, and the Nations. And Chapter 8 is titled, Facing Hard Facts. But Dave, it seems that very few people today care to face hard facts. And before we get to an astonishing example right there in Chapter 8 of your book, let's talk about what is, at the time we're taping this program, an international event which we might title Paris is Burning. Yet it has so far as I could tell, received only passing attention from the world's press. And at that, there's no mention, I have an article right here in front of me, there's no mention that it has some religious significance. You know, for example, Dave, this is our copy of the Bend Bulletin. Mm-hmm. You know, an article that began on the first page, front page, and goes to second page. And throughout the article, I'm finding riots in the suburbs of France, Paris, that is.
In over 300 towns now.
Right. Literally 1,300 vehicles burned.
That was in one night.
Right. 10 policemen hit by gunfire, and so on. Now, as I read through this article, I wouldn't have a clue that this had anything to do with Muslims. But it does. It's interesting with regard to the religious aspect. It mentions that there were Jewish synagogues that were being burned and so on, but not one word that this is a Muslim-related riot.
That's just incredible.
I mean, there are hard facts here, aren't they?
It's a cover-up. Mm-hmm. Why a cover-up? Just like President Bush says, Islam is peace. It was 12 days. You had 12 days of riots. The most physical destruction to property of all kinds since World War II. France has seen nothing like this since World War II. And only after this went on for 12 nights of mayhem, and destruction and anarchy is what it is, did Jacques Chirac, the president of France, finally spoke out about it and called it a national emergency, which paved the way for curfews. Can you imagine? Night after night after night. And you don't even call a curfew. Talk about catering to Muslims. Now,
Dave, what's behind this? Can you fill our listeners in on, how did this get started, and why this and why there?
You have about 6 million Muslims in France, about 18 million in Europe. And in England, more Muslims meet in their mosques every weekend than so-called Christians in churches. This is in England. There has been a low-level, they have not reported at all in the press, intifada, jihad, going on with attacks on synagogues, desecration of Jewish cemeteries, attacks on kosher delicatessens and Jewish businesses. This has been going on for a long, long time. That's one of the reasons why Jews are just getting out of France and heading into Israel. But what has happened, Tom, you see, we've been warning about this for years. We have explained what Islam is. Every Jew must be killed before any Muslim can be resurrected. Muhammad stated that very clearly. It's taught in all the mosques and in all the Islamic academies and so forth. The entire world must be conquered by Islam. And how are they going to do that? In this chapter, we talk about the Battle of Tours in 732 A.D., where Charles Martel turned back an army of several 100,000 Muslims, killed the commander and so forth. Had that not happened and Europe been saved from the Muslim hordes who had already taken Spain and Portugal and southern France, we might be speaking Arabic right now. We would be Muslims as well. They were turned back, of course, also at the gates of Vienna. Now, I point out in this chapter, Facing Hard Facts, that we have a new and more effective jihad, a new and more effective invasion of Europe that is really accomplishing a great deal. Instead of a frontal assault like happened at the Battle of Tours, where they returned back, the Muslims are infiltrating the society. They come as immigrants, peace-loving, of course, immigrants, but they come loyal to Islam. You have to understand that in Islam, religion and state are not separate. Jesus made that clear. He said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And the separation between church and state that is recognized in our Constitution here in the United States is not allowed under Islam. Okay? So when you have Muslims, they're gathering in their enclaves, communities on the outskirts of Paris or in the suburbs and around many of these cities, and they do not want to integrate in society. Many of them do not want to learn French. Now, they complain that they don't have jobs. Well, they don't speak the language. They don't want to learn. They don't want to integrate in society. They don't want to qualify to be part of French society. And so they are on the dole. And if you went down the listing of the people who are on welfare, by far the highest percentage are Muslims. Most of the crime is being committed by Muslims. I mean, this is, Tom, for the last several years, you've had probably 15 or 20 or more cars torched every night in France. I think this year, 2005, you had nearly 1,000 police cars have been stoned by Muslims, by the youth. They want to have their own community. They want to have Sharia law. And France has condoned this. They have turned the other way. They have closed their eyes, turned a blind eye to this, and they've pretended, oh, this is wonderful, we're getting along well, we can integrate it, and it isn't working. Now,
Dave, in past programs, we've talked about the birth rate among Muslims.
Right.
And I hope our listeners out there are not thinking we're creating some kind of racial hatred here. It has nothing to do with that. We're just giving our listeners the facts of what is going on. For example, let's take an Islamic country like Yemen. The birth rate in Yemen is 7.2.
right.
And at that rate, or even a little lower, when they immigrate to Europe, they're having more babies. Well, I think the birth rate in Italy, for example, is like 1.2.
No, it's minus.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you have that also affecting the welfare rolls.
Tom, in the not-too-distant future, you and I won't be here, and hopefully we'll have left in the rapture, not by death, but they will overtake. And this is what they say. They say, we are going to outnumber you soon, particularly in the areas where they concentrate. Then they can use democracy. They can vote their people in on the school board and take over schools. They can get their own mayor. I don't remember, I think about 3 or 4 cities in Netherlands. Within a very few years, they will have a majority of Muslims for the entire city. Now, these people are not intending to integrate. And we mention in the book how suddenly, with the murder of Van Gogh,
the
filmmaker in Holland, and with the Muslims advertising on the internet rewards, monetary rewards for taking out Jews and for taking out people who speak out against them, and the aggressiveness is increasing. Finally, Holland is waking up, and it's being discussed by the European Union. We will not allow immigrants to come into our countries unless they conform to our laws, unless they are willing to learn the language, unless they are willing to integrate into society. And the people in Holland are saying, we are not willing to lose our country. We're not willing to give up the culture that our forebears brought to us, and this is our heritage. And we are not willing to have these people come in and take over our culture and destroy what we have lived for all these years and force us to become Muslims, which is what eventually will happen. So that is a situation, and this is the background to these riots. They've been doing this, Tom, on a lower level for a long time, and now they had an excuse. And now they suddenly were handed on a platter an excuse. 2 Muslim young women hid from the police, and we haven't yet heard why they were hiding from the police. They must have done something wrong or thought they did something wrong. And they hid in this electrical power relay station or whatever it was and were electrocuted. Well, that became the excuse. Just like, you remember, Intifada. How did Intifada begin? Well, because Sharon walked up on Temple Mount. He had permission. There was an advance notice. He had permission from the PLO who controlled Temple Mount. They gave him permission, and he walked up there. I mean, this is a leader in Israel doesn't have the right to walk on Temple Mount. That became the excuse. Now, Tom, they tried to do it earlier, and I had a communication from Israel from someone in the armed forces over there who said that the Israeli police confiscated thousands of flyers that the Temple Mount had been invaded and we must rise up against them and so forth. And that was before the event even happened. So now in France, they got this excuse to riot. And they are communicating with one another on the internet. They're communicating by their cell phones. This is not some spontaneous uprising of a handful of youth that are on a rampage here and there. This is a coordinated effort to bring down France, to impose their will upon the French.
And Dave, what about those, in some stories that I've read about this, they're saying, oh, these people they're being discriminated against. They're basically put in ghettos, and they're trying to draw an analogy between the blacks here in ghetto areas. Does that fly?
But Tom, I am not an expert on this, and I have not taken a survey of France, but I have seen Muslims, for example. You want to go to London? I'm almost afraid to go in a park in London now. Used to be rosy-cheeked Londoners and boys and girls playing games and so forth. I can tell you now, it is all Muslims. They have taken over, and I don't see them living in ghettos. When they come pouring out of the mosque by the thousands right next to Hyde Park there on a Saturday, anyone is free to live anywhere they want to. You have to have the funds, of course. There are different prices to housing. So that depends upon your job. Now, many of these Muslims are very wealthy. And you walk the streets. Tom, I lived not far from Geneva not too many years ago, and I was in Geneva probably once a week. And I can tell you, I do not recognize Geneva now. The hotels are owned by Muslims. That doesn't sound like they're living in ghettos. The Mercedes are all being driven by Muslims, and Muslims are on the streets. They've practically taken over the sidewalks, and this is the downtown expensive area of Geneva. So now, undoubtedly, there may be some Muslims who are living in poor areas, just as there are some French who are living in poor areas. But to say they've been discriminated against, they can't get good jobs or whatever, you have to have some training to have a job. And if you're not willing to speak the language, and if you want to dress differently than everyone else does, you refuse to become part of the French culture, then you have your own self to blame for not having these kind of jobs. You want to create your own culture. And in Islam, you must eat like Muhammad and dress like Muhammad and
this
act
is 7th
like
century
Muhammad.
stuff.
That's right. This is what the Taliban imposed, but you will find it in many Muslim countries. So to say, well, I can't get a job as a banker or as an accountant, or whatever, but I insist on dressing the way I want and acting the way I want, and I'm not going to conform to your laws, and I'm not going to be educated in your schools. We want our own schools, and we want to learn the Quran instead of history, and we don't care about the history of your country. We're not interested in that. Tom, we do have tests, in America that people must take. History lessons. You have to learn a little history of America and so forth to become a citizen, and we want the citizens of America, the immigrants, and there are millions of them, we want them to integrate in our society, become American citizens, become part of our country. not live in their own little communities, and then they can call them ghettos, but you've created this yourself by your own religion.
Dave, we know as well that, as you said, this isn't just an immigrant getting out of his home country and trying to start a new life in a new country. The men are told to get on the welfare rolls right away so they don't have to worry about a job, and they can devote their time to the activities of one Islamic group or another.
Exactly, and these countries are to blame for paying them to have babies, paying them to do nothing but stir up trouble, putting them on the welfare rolls. And Tom, this is a welfare state, and to a large extent we've created that here. I mean, you can go south of the border. We used to live in Southern California. Just go over the border to Tijuana and walk in a bank on the first day of the month, and you've got these people lined up almost out into the street cashing their Social Security checks or their welfare checks or whatever. So America has created the same problem. They come to America and have babies, and then they're on the welfare rolls and so forth. Tom, I'm not saying we shouldn't have sympathy, but I can tell you don't do that in Switzerland.
Yeah.
I lived in Switzerland. You have to have some qualifications to live there, and you get a permit to live there. And they don't just allow you to come in and get on the welfare rolls. Then, of course, some of them would say, well, yeah, but you need us because we do work that you guys don't. They have imported, Germany has imported Turks for labor, and they can say, well, we're doing the labor that you guys don't want. Yeah, but you're getting paid a whole lot more for it than you could earn in your own country. So it's a complicated problem, but Tom, at the root of it is Islam.
And Dave, you've mentioned this before. France is reaping what it has sown. Back in the 70s, I was in Iran. I was actually there for a film project. And that was the beginnings of the revolution. And Khomeini had stirred the revolution, and guess where he was? He was in France, all right?
You'd have to say, Tom, that France sort of supported him in this effort.
Well, he was there. He was allowed to be there, and he was sending audio tapes over to Iran, and the mullahs were getting. One of the first instances of the revolution had to do with burning out movie theaters, because this is where the Western influence was taking place. And, of course, I was there to make a movie. So that was a pretty testy thing.
Well, Tom, on one hand, you can't blame them because there's an awful lot of horrible movies. Hollywood has spread immorality around the world, but you shouldn't burn it down.
Right. Well,
just don't go and see those things.
But my point is that Khomeini was in France. Who else has been treated incredibly well by France?
Well, you just had Arafat.
Yasser Arafat.
Right. And they praised him, and they put him up in their hospital and so forth. Yeah. Well, Tom, France opposed the United States when it came to going into Iraq. And
was it because of their population of Muslims, you think?
I think so. I think that was seen by the Muslim in the street as a sign of weakness on the part of France. We can attack them now. Tom, it's all part of a bigger picture, and like it or not, no one can deny the fact that Islam must take over the world. If not, then Muhammad is a false prophet, and the Quran is not the word of the true God, and Allah is not the true God. And as we mentioned many times on this program, and you don't have any trouble documenting it, Islam, the Muslims, the Arabs, must destroy Israel. There is not an Arab map in the world that even shows the existence of Israel. We've said that many times. Now, and yet the world, European Union, forces Israel to make peace with an enemy that does not acknowledge her existence. Now, if that is not only insane, but immoral, and at the same time, they've got all these 18 million Muslims now in Europe, they are going to find out what Israel has been up against. We're finding it out in Iraq, the suicide bombers and so forth. Israel faced this for the last 50 years, and they have done a remarkable job in preventing thousands of these attacks. And they put up a wall, a fence, to keep them out, and the world jumps all over them, and the world court condemns them for it. So maybe eyes will be opened. Mm-hmm. And maybe, I've been praying for many years, that the Muslim governments will be embarrassed by what they're doing, and that there will be an outcry of rage against the oppression of the Muslim people themselves, and that eventually freedom will enter along and the gospel will be allowed to get to them.
Please visit our website, thebereancall.org, to access our radio archives going back to 1999 and our newsletter going back to 1986. We offer daily updates by email or visit us on Facebook or Twitter. Are you looking for information about a specific topic? Go to thebereancall.org and click on Topics at the top of the page. Our online store is thebereancall.com. We offer a wide variety of books, tracts, CDs, and DVDs. Note that most of our ebooks are free. I'm Gary Carmichael. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you can join us again next week. Until then, we encourage you to search the Scriptures 24/7.
Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back.